Hello, I'm Scott Marcus, the Senior Content Manager with the International Screenwriters Association. I needed a little bit more information on three subgenres of movies and storytelling that I really don't know much about, and I thought you might find that interesting too. In this short conversation, presented in three parts, I'll be talking with Jeffrey Morales of the ISA about anime movies, video game movies, and comic book movies. Enjoy. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to statistics and numbers and that kind of stuff. Not that it means I'm good at math, but I do like things like, baseball and box office charts. And I've been somebody that watches the box office and pays attention to the weekend charts for as long as I can remember, since college. And I started to get really cocky this pandemic time because there was nothing else to do but really pay attention to it. And I thought, boy, I'm getting really good at this. I should start writing weekly articles. So then I started to look at upcoming weekends and thought, I have no idea how to handicap this. I'm immediately out of my element because we had things like anime movies coming up, more in-depth comic book movies, and more that are just a little bit outside of my realm of knowledge. So I wanted to bring in somebody to fill in the gaps of my knowledge. So that's why I'm bringing aboard a fellow valued member of the ISA team, Jeff Morales. Thank you for talking to me and hopefully educating me.
Thank you for having me here. And I am also a nerd when it comes to charts and the box office and things like that. And I love to follow it. And there's a golden rule of being a nerd that I found, which is the first thing you have to do is you have to find someone who's even more of a nerd than you. Unfortunately, I seem to be at the end of the branch right now, but I am a big fan of video games and anime, and I'm a big proponent of people in the industry starting to pay a little bit more attention to them. What I hope I can provide is a bit more of a critical analysis of some of these things and explain why did this hit, why did this not hit, and what's on the horizon.
That's exactly it. Because there are certain times where I think, I see where this one will go, and then it just doesn't perform, and I don't know the answer to why. Or this one does perform exceptionally well, and I'm equally lost. And you were right. And video game movies were the last category that I meant to touch on there, because there have been some that have excelled and some that I thought would do well, but really didn't resonate with the audience.
There's something else going on here: the evolution of the blockbuster. Because when I was growing up, when you were growing up, we had the understanding that if you wanted to have a hit blockbuster movie, it had to be 4-quadrant. It had to be accessible to the young, the old, male and female, which can be thought in those terms. And even when you look at something like, say, Jurassic Park, which is
exactly the movie I was thinking of when you said that. Yeah.
Right. And it's because, one, it's perfect in terms of just a blockbuster, but also having an identity. Jurassic Park is kind of a slasher movie.
Yeah, monster movie.
But then you remember that, well, there are the kids there. There's the family element, there's the whimsy, there's the science. And so it has all of those peripheral elements. Now, if you want to make a Jurassic Park movie, it's much more the action. And when you try to retain the kids like they did in the first Jurassic World, people don't like that. They go, this kid's kind of annoying. Let's have more of Chris Pratt. Let's have more gung-ho. Let's get a little bit more of the adrenaline. And it used to be that producers would be the ones going, no. Can you put a romance in there? Can you make it more heartfelt? Can you make the ending not too dark? I don't think in the 1990s they would end with the entire world getting infected with dinosaurs. like at the end of, spoilers for whatever the hell that second movie was called. When we talked about blockbuster in the 90s, and I'm just going to tell the audience that I have a dog who is a Siberian Husky who's right here, and she's loud, and you may hear her. We are now in the era of what I call the niche blockbuster, where it's no longer make the movie as broad as possible for as broad a market as possible within a particular country. Jurassic Park did really well in the United States first and foremost, and then spread out elsewhere. Star Wars famously did really well in the United States. It actually didn't do too well in certain markets like China. Modern blockbuster franchises are increasingly focused on a particular segment of the population that can be found in different parts of the world. And the perfect example of this is the Transformers movies.
Oh, okay.
If I said to you, okay, it's giant robots fighting. And look, I got Transformers right over there, just off camera. I mean, Look,
There we go.
there's a little optimist right there. So if anybody wants to question my love of Transformers, no. But I would not say to somebody, hey, I bet the best way to make a Transformers movie that's going to make the most amount of money is to have loud, complicated metal smash itself against other loud, complicated metal for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
No. And I wouldn't want to go full bro and as much as those movies do. But here's the thing. It's a reliable demographic if you're targeting that and you're catering to it in the United States. And that's not just the United States. You can go to China and they'll have the same guys there who like the same kind of thing. And you really only need to make small cultural changes because you're essentially targeting a universal subculture.
That's interesting. And on a smaller scale, something that seem more attainable to our audience of writers. This movie over here is something I edited, Robotropolis. And it is what it sounds like. It is an apocalyptic movie. It was made independently with the intent that this is going to be an easy sell to the Sci-Fi Channel. Because it seems right up their alley. It was, when the first Sharknado movie was out and all that kind of stuff was going on. The Sci-Fi Channel passed on it. Why? The body count wasn't high enough. Literally, it wasn't bloody enough. Not enough people died. So the movie was made. I can't say we made it. I was the editor on it, but the movie was made with the intent to sell to American cable. American cable wasn't interested in it, but it got theatrical releases across Asia and the Middle East. So as you're saying, it still did find an audience of people that would actually, not just sit at home and flip through channels and stumble across it, but go out to see it, buy a ticket to see it in a theater. I think this is, as you were talking about, finding a similar market, niche markets around the world. I think that does lend itself to our next topic, which would be comic book movies, which might be they're definitely more mainstream today than they were back when I was a kid growing up. And as we're recording this is the opening weekend of Doctor Strange, the movie a lot of people believe will be the highest grossing summer blockbuster of the entire year. Right now, as it stands, between Thursday previews and Friday box office, it made $90 million. To compare that to Spider-Man No Way Home, which this is a continuation of that story, that movie made about 121 million. So it's lagging behind. It's at about 74% ish of what Spider-Man did. If that percentage holds up throughout the weekend, we're looking at an opening weekend of 191.96 million. And I'm getting specific because that is going to give it a neck and neck finish with 2019's The Lion King to be the 9th highest grossing opening weekend ever. There were some hopes that it would break $200 million, which still 192 is pretty close. But if it passes 202 million, it will pass Black Panther and the all-time opening weekend ranks. So for me, as you might be able to see, there's some signs around me that I am a big Batman fan. I never got into Spider-Man. Let's talk about what makes the Spider-Man story. And of course, it was the first mega blockbuster in my lifetime, Tobey Maguire's release back when I was in college. But those movies have just continued to really perform well, even though they've rebooted the franchise a couple of times in pretty short order. So what is it to me? What am I not getting? What makes Spider-Man so successful?
Spider-Man is unique. Comic book movies are unique because we have all this IP. And without getting into specifics, sometimes I read projects for people for the purposes of determining their adaptation potential. 9 times out of 10, you're taking a shot in the dark because it's just some random thing. Sometimes it's a project that hasn't even been released, because the hunt for IP now is so aggressive that you have to find something that hasn't come out yet, go get the adaptation rights in, and then hope that, okay, we haven't just wasted a whole bunch of time here. In fact, movies like Millar, I think is his name, the Kick-Ass, Wanted, a lot of his projects actually get entered into development for adaptation before they're released, because they can generally say, okay, he makes stuff, even if we barely adapt what actually happens, it has enough elements that we can work with and we can call it an adaptation, and that makes producers happy. With comic book movies, you have a bit more of a trial by fire that they've been through over really decades. And they've not just had good and bad stories that we can adapt, but they've had interpretations of the characters and characters created in reaction to other characters and market demands. So they all kind of work well together. Spider-Man is the greatest example of that. If you're not really into the history of comic books, you might not know the terms Golden Age, Silver Age, Modern Age. And so for the audience, when you first had comic book heroes come out in, the 40s and even a little bit earlier, you had Superman, you had Batman, you had the Flash, and you had Captain America as well. They were iconic almost from the start. They were very mythological. They were very concept driven. And then they started to wane. All of comics started to wane for a lot of reasons. Part of the reason why was because these weren't really relatable characters. Comic book fans can debate me about that, but I'm talking about relatable in comparison to Peter Parker.
Sure. Okay.
When Marvel came out, they started coming out with the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, and they were the dawn of the Silver Age. And this is getting into the 70s. This was getting into a greater emphasis of science fiction, so more understandable ways that these characters were empowered. And so the idea of Peter Parker being this hero who fails, who doesn't get the girl, who's weaker than some of the people that he fights, that was a real change. Pretty much every hero would follow in his shadow. And so it's not surprising that Spider-Man is a hit and is always going to be stronger than some of these other heroes, because frankly, he defined decades of comic books. I'm actually really excited for this year.
Okay.
Because we have Spider-Man and Batman. And what I think is not being discussed a lot is that we have Spider-Man and Batman movies that have absolutely nothing to do with one another. And that's kind of the first time that's happened, really. The original Spider-Man that you were talking about. People kind of forget that Spider-Man was not very much like Spider-Man. It was Spider-Man being adapted with all the strengths of Spider-Man from the comics, but also keeping in mind the hits that had come before, Superman and Batman.
Sure.
I mean, some of this is obvious because it has Danny Elfman doing the score for Batman. So you had a bit more of an operatic quality, which was applied to New York City, which also fit with the period in time, because that was 2002. It was shot pre 9/11. And that was also after the Giuliani era. So for modern audiences that might not understand this, our interpretation of New York City completely changed towards the late 90s. And we're, I think, open more to this new vision of New York City that Spider-Man was putting out. If you want to get a different vision of New York City that's still in the same genre, go watch the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and where everything is wet. And I think there's just always a saxophone being played in the background. And it's just, the crime is omnipresent. But here we had almost a metropolis style of, well, Manhattan, but with a toned down Gotham crime element for the street level adventure. So it was all those strong points. And then I called him Superman because Spider-Man was acting a bit more like Superman. He was more morally together. He knew exactly what he was going to do all the time, even when it was hard. These are things you expect a bit more of Clark Kent. Spider-Man tends to brood a little bit more.
Yeah, even visually. I mean, you have similar colors, the higher key lighting, brighter, as opposed to Batman's Gotham, which is also quite dark.
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely a division between Spider-Man, Superman on one side, Batman on the other.
And also keep in mind that you had Sam Raimi directing it.
Yeah.
And Sam Raimi was interested in Batman. So you have this heritage kind of coming in from there. So Spider-Man, that original Spider-Man, was able to take all of those strengths and just go, well, here, you have it all with one hero. And once again, when you have that, it almost seems obvious in retrospect as to why you have a hit. But what also gets missed is Batman Begins, because Spider-Man was so defining that when Batman came out, now Batman was imitating Spider-Man. We had a younger Bruce Wayne. He was still figuring out his morals, and people will debate this quite a bit, but the interpretation, including of the new Batman movie, is that Bruce Wayne doesn't exist. Bruce Wayne died essentially with his parents. Batman is the real identity, and Bruce Wayne is the mask. The Nolan movies didn't do that. The Nolan's movies went with more of a Peter Parker, and he's very much a person with issues and love interests, and he wants to have his own life. And so the idea of being torn between being a superhero and having your own life, that is all Spider-Man. That's one of the major things he brought to the comic book genre. All of a sudden we had Spider-Man acting like Batman, and then we had Batman acting like Spider-Man. And then the both of them were in this era of trilogies, which was in the wake of The Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars prequels had come out, and so everything was getting a prequel, and they had their own kind of narrative convention. So that further aligned these movies. It's only been these newest iterations. The Andrew Garfield thing is its own thing. And then you had the Snyderverse, which was in reaction. Even if you're going in the opposite direction, it's still a reaction to the MCU.
Sure.
But now we have, it seems like people who said, no, we're making a Batman movie and we don't care about anything. We're just making Batman as we want to make it. And Spider-Man has been for a while, Spider-Man in the MCU, and the MCU goes its own way. And we've never had these independent interpretations of these characters in film to this degree. And so I'm so excited. But it also makes me go, okay, well, now you can also say to yourself, Spider-Man's going to do better.
Because that is the ultimate question. Why? Because both movies are successful. Both franchises are successful. The Batman did great box office this late spring, but still was nowhere near what Spider-Man No Way Home recently did.
Yeah. And that's because as much as a true diehard comic book fan might say, well, yeah, but you turned Batman into Peter Parker. Why did you do that? Well, more people like Peter Parker. He's more of a relatable figure than a guy who's,
it's true,
just gonna beat up everybody.
Well, and comes from immense wealth and all that. And so it is immediately less, so a main character being less relatable is really the core of it.
Yeah. And that spirals out into every aspect of the movie. With Doctor Strange, though, I'm a little bit more pessimistic on its prospects. We just had Spider-Man, and then we had Uncharted, which did better than I thought it would. But that seems to be pretty clearly because of Tom Holland really proving that he is a box office star and he can carry a movie. Not to say that other people weren't great in that movie. Doctor Strange, on the other hand, as much as people like Doctor Strange, they like Benedict Cumberbatch. I like them both quite a bit. You send them off into their own movie, you simply don't have that transition of a lead to a lead. You're going from he was a supporting in one film to now the lead in another, and they're very different films, and audiences aren't going to make the Sam Raimi connection. So I don't think that there is that set of intangibles for Doctor Strange.
As far as creating the momentum for Doctor Strange to be successful, WandaVision is kind of a lead into it as well, correct? And that was
very much so.
Okay,
yes.
So WandaVision was a huge hit on Disney Plus. Did Spider-Man No Way Home create enough momentum that people seeing Spider-Man feel like they then need to go and see Doctor Strange to continue that story? Or do you think maybe that's something that they could have embellished a bit more?
The sad truth of it is, and we kind of don't want to say this. I mean, I'm a critic, and sometimes you have to say this. I think sometimes we give a little too much credit to the audience as to how much they're paying attention to it. We also have to keep in mind that we don't know really what's a hit on Disney Plus. We don't know what's a hit on Netflix even. I imagine that's going to change soon, because we're already starting to get rumblings from actors and their agents. They need to be able to say, no, this show did this well, because I need to have fair grounds in a negotiation. So I think that's going to change. But in the meantime, we really just sort of have to go, oh, okay, well, WandaVision did well, but WandaVision also was its own peculiar genre piece. It was focused, again, on a different character. And then you have the added issue of, even when these were all movies, people would still just go to me and they say, Jeff, I just watched the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Can I just keep doing that? Or I just like Captain America. Can I keep doing that? When you say, okay, now how much is the lead in from a show on another medium with a different character and a different genre going to support this over here? Then you're entirely relying on brand, and you're relying on general knowledge of these things. And it's too much for audiences to me. One of the other things that we kind of have to deal with Doctor Strange, without getting into spoilers, no spoilers, Scott hasn't even seen it. Audiences, when they walk out of a movie, we have CinemaScore, but CinemaScore is notorious for like, oh, you get an A-, that's low.
Yeah.
However, you can have a hit movie with a bad CinemaScore. CinemaScore, because of when it is taken as a survey, is really a reaction of what they got versus their expectations. If you watched WandaVision and you have certain expectations of the character, and even if you watched Spider-Man and all of the other MCU movies and you have an understanding of Doctor Strange and how these movies tend to play out and resolve, you might be a little turned around by Doctor Strange. That doesn't mean that you're not going to like Doctor Strange. What it does mean is that you're going to have more of a difficult time recommending it, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
We also have within Doctor Strange a bit more of an emotional set of complexities, to put it that way.
Okay.
A lot of Marvel movies, you kind of walk in, walk out, and it's not like it's going to just completely upend how you feel about everything. And some might say that's a criticism of the MCU. With Doctor Strange, I think it's going to leave people a little curious about not just how things are going, but how they feel about where it's gone. And I don't think it's a shock that Kevin Feige has said that they're going to start planning the rest of the MCU. They have essentially, he almost admitted that they haven't had that lockdown of a plan the past 3 years. And in retrospect, it does seem like maybe a lot of this multiversal stuff was, let's just kind of throw all of the balls in the air and watch them fall. And we're going to actually create a narrative out of that after everything lands, after we've had our breather, and we have to pick these things back up. And as a consequence, I don't think you're going to walk out of Doctor Strange going, oh man, I know exactly what the next Avengers movie is, or that there's this building sense of something. And so as a result, I'm expecting a bit of a harsher drop for Doctor Strange into the next week. Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, that'll be interesting to see. I like that we have a prediction here now.